Picture this. You wake up one morning and suddenly your favorite Canadian maple syrup costs 35% more at the store. Your phone made in China is much more expensive. Even the avocados from Mexico have a higher price tag. What happened overnight? Welcome to LES, Learn English Through Story. I'm Harry, and today we're diving into one of the most dramatic economic stories of our time, Trump's escalating tariff war that's reshaping global trade. Get ready, everyone, because this story will take you on an exciting journey about tariffs, trade wars, and how political decisions can change the price of everything in your shopping cart. We'll explore how a simple government policy can turn neighbor countries into economic rivals and affect millions of people's daily lives. But don't worry, I won't be telling this complex story alone. My friend Tom is here to guide us through this economic adventure. Tom has been following trade news for years, and he's going to break down this complicated topic into an engaging story that anyone can understand. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let Tom take you on this journey through the world of international trade. Tom, the stage is yours.
Hello there, friends. Tom here, and what a story I have for you today. Imagine you're playing a board game with your neighbors, but suddenly someone changes all the rules in the middle of the game. That's exactly what happened in the world of international trade when President Trump decided to use tariffs as his main weapon in what many people call the Great Trade War of 2025. Chapter 1. The calm before the storm. Let me take you back to January 2025. Donald Trump had just become president for the second time. The world was watching carefully because everyone remembered his first presidency from 2017 to 2021. Back then, Trump loved to use tariffs, special taxes on goods coming from other countries. During his campaign, Trump made many promises. He said he would protect American workers. He promised to bring back manufacturing jobs to the United States. He talked about making other countries pay their fair share. But most importantly, he said he would use tariffs to force other countries to negotiate better deals with America. Canada was one of Trump's biggest targets. Why Canada, you might ask? Well, Canada and the United States share the longest peaceful border in the world. They trade billions of dollars in goods every year. Canada sends oil, wood, wheat, and many other products to America. In return, America sends cars, machinery, and technology to Canada. But Trump had complaints. He said Canada wasn't doing enough to stop illegal drugs from crossing the border. He claimed that Canadian companies had unfair advantages. He argued that America was losing money in trade with Canada. These complaints would soon turn into action. The business world was nervous. Stock markets moved up and down with every tweet from Trump. Company leaders held meetings to prepare for what might come next. They remembered the chaos of Trump's first trade war with China. Now, it seemed like Trump was ready to start an even bigger fight. Chapter 2. The First Strike. 25%. Tariffs. In early February 2025, Trump made his first big move. He announced a 25% tariff on all products coming from Canada and Mexico. This was a huge shock because these countries had a special trade agreement with America called USMCA, the United States, Mexico, Canada Agreement. Let me explain what a 25% tariff means in simple terms. Imagine you want to buy a Canadian product that normally costs $100.00. With a 25% tariff, the person importing that product to America has to pay an extra $25.00 in taxes. Usually, this extra cost gets passed on to you, the customer. So that $100.00 product now costs $125.00. The reaction was immediate. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau called Trump to discuss the situation. Mexican leaders were equally concerned. Both countries said they would consider their own tariffs on American products. This is called retaliation. American businesses that depend on Canadian and Mexican goods started to panic. A furniture company in Michigan that uses Canadian wood suddenly faced much higher costs. A restaurant chain that imports avocados from Mexico had to decide whether to raise menu prices or lose money. But Trump wasn't finished. He also put tariffs on China, America's biggest trading partner. Chinese leaders responded quickly with their own tariffs on American products. Within weeks, what started as a policy announcement had become a full trade war involving the world's three largest economies. The media called it Tariff Thursday because Trump seemed to announce new tariffs every Thursday. Business leaders couldn't plan for the future because they never knew what would be taxed next. This uncertainty made many companies stop investing in new projects or hiring new workers. Chapter 3, Canada Fights Back. Canada didn't just sit quietly and accept the American tariffs. Prime Minister Trudeau announced that Canada would put its own tariffs on American products. They targeted specific items that would hurt American businesses and workers in states that voted for Trump. Canada put high tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and agricultural products. They also targeted luxury goods like American whiskey and motorcycles. This strategy was smart because it put pressure on American politicians in states that produced these goods. The Canadian government also launched a public campaign to explain their position. They reminded everyone that Canada was America's closest ally and biggest trading partner. They pointed out that Canada had fought alongside America in many wars. They argued that treating Canada like an enemy made no sense. Canadian businesses started looking for new customers in other countries. A lumber company that had sold wood to America for 50 years suddenly started shipping to Japan and South Korea instead. Canadian farmers began exploring markets in Asia and Europe for their wheat and other crops. The Canadian dollar became weaker compared to the American dollar. This made Canadian products cheaper for other countries to buy, but it also made imported goods more expensive for Canadian consumers. Ordinary Canadians started feeling the effects when their grocery bills went up. Meanwhile, American consumers began noticing higher prices too. A coffee shop owner in Seattle found that Canadian coffee beans now cost 25% more. A construction company in Minnesota discovered that Canadian lumber prices had jumped dramatically. These costs were being passed on to customers across America. Chapter 4, The Escalation. 35% tariffs. Just when people thought the situation couldn't get worse, Trump made another dramatic move. In July 2025, he announced that tariffs on Canadian goods would increase from 25% to 35%. This was unprecedented in modern trade relations between friendly countries. President Trump signed an executive order raising Canada tariff to 35% on Thursday, citing the nation's role in allowing illegal drugs to flow into America. Trump claimed that Canada wasn't doing enough to stop fentanyl and other illegal drugs from crossing the border into the United States. The 35% tariff was devastating for Canadian exporters. A Canadian company that exported $1 million, 0 cents worth of products to America, would now face $350,000, 0 cents, in additional taxes. Many companies simply couldn't afford to continue selling to American customers at these rates. Trump also threatened to raise the tariffs even higher if Canada retaliated with its own new tariffs. This created a dangerous spiral where each country's response made the situation worse. Economic experts called it a race to the bottom, where both countries would end up hurting their own economies. The lumber industry was hit particularly hard because America imports a lot of wood from Canada. American home builders suddenly faced much higher costs for construction materials. The price of building new homes increased, making it harder for young families to buy their first house. Canadian energy companies also suffered. Although oil and electricity continued to flow across the border, the uncertainty made it difficult to plan new investments. Some projects that would have created thousands of jobs were put on hold. Chapter 5. Global Ripple Effects. The trade war between America and Canada didn't stay confined to those two countries. Like throwing a stone into a pond, the effects spread out in ripples across the global economy. Other countries started choosing sides. Some European nations criticized Trump's tariffs and offered to increase trade with Canada. Japan and South Korea saw opportunities to sell more products to both America and Canada, as traditional suppliers became too expensive. China watched the situation carefully. Chinese leaders realized that if America was willing to put high tariffs on its closest ally, China needed to be prepared for even tougher measures. They started building stronger trade relationships with other countries to reduce their dependence on American markets. Mexico found itself in a difficult position. As part of the USMCA agreement, Mexico had close trade ties with both America and Canada. The trade war forced Mexican companies to choose which market to prioritize, often leading to difficult business decisions. The World Trade Organization tried to mediate the dispute, but Trump's administration largely ignored international trade rules. This weakened the global system that had governed international trade since World War II. Stock markets around the world became very volatile. On days when Trump announced new tariffs, markets would fall. When there were rumors of negotiations, markets would rise. This uncertainty made it difficult for companies to make long-term plans and discouraged investment. Chapter 6, The Human Cost. Behind all the economic statistics and political statements were real people whose lives were affected by the trade war. Let me tell you some of their stories. Sarah owned a small furniture store in Vermont. She had been buying beautiful wooden chairs from a Canadian craftsman for 10 years. When the tariffs hit, the chairs became too expensive for her customers. She had to find a new supplier, but the quality wasn't as good. Several customers complained, and her business started losing money. On the Canadian side, Mark ran a maple syrup farm in Quebec. His family had been making syrup for 4 generations, and 80% of their sales went to American customers. The tariffs made his syrup too expensive compared to local American alternatives. Mark had to lay off 3 workers and was considering selling the farm that had been in his family for over 100 years. Jennifer worked at an American car factory that used Canadian steel. When steel prices went up because of tariffs, her company had to cut costs elsewhere. They reduced overtime hours for workers and postponed plans to hire 200 new employees. Jennifer's younger brother had been hoping to get one of those jobs after graduating from high school. The effects weren't limited to businesses directly involved in trade. Linda ran a restaurant in Detroit that served a lot of construction workers. When construction projects slowed down because of higher material costs, fewer workers came to her restaurant for lunch. Her income dropped by 30%, and she had to reduce her staff from 8 employees to 5. These stories repeated themselves thousands of times across both countries. The trade war wasn't just about governments and big corporations. It affected families, communities, and individual dreams. Chapter 7, The Negotiation Game. As the economic pain increased, both sides realized they needed to find a way out of the escalating trade war. But negotiating while tariffs were in place was like trying to have a friendly conversation while someone is stepping on your foot. Trump's negotiation strategy was based on what he called maximum pressure. He believed that by making the tariffs painful enough, other countries would be forced to accept American demands. His team argued that short-term pain would lead to better long-term deals for America. Canada's approach was different. They tried to maintain diplomatic relationships while defending their economic interests. Canadian negotiators worked to remind their American counterparts of the long history of cooperation between the two countries. The negotiations were complicated by domestic politics in both countries. Trump faced pressure from American farmers, who were losing Canadian customers for their products. At the same time, he had supporters who loved his tough stance on trade and didn't want him to appear weak. Canadian politicians faced their own challenges. The public was angry about American tariffs, and many wanted their government to respond with even tougher measures. But Canadian leaders knew that escalating the trade war would ultimately hurt Canada more than America because Canada's economy was smaller. Behind the scenes, business leaders from both countries were working to find solutions. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce held joint meetings to discuss ways to end the trade war. They prepared detailed reports showing how the tariffs were hurting businesses and workers in both countries. Several attempts at negotiation failed because neither side was willing to make the first move toward compromise. Trump insisted that Canada make major concessions before he would reduce tariffs. Canada argued that they couldn't negotiate under the threat of economic punishment. Chapter 8, Looking Toward the Future. As our story brings us to the present day, the trade war between America and Canada continues with no clear end in sight. Trump's threat to raise his tariff on Canadian goods entering the United States to 35% has created a new reality in North American trade relationships. The economic data tells a concerning story. Trade between America and Canada has dropped by 40% since the tariffs began. Both countries have lost jobs, and consumers in both nations are paying higher prices for many products. The American construction industry faces ongoing challenges due to expensive Canadian lumber, while Canadian exporters have lost their biggest market. Some economists predict that the trade war could last for years. They point out that trade disputes often become political symbols that are difficult for leaders to abandon without looking weak. Other experts believe that the economic pain will eventually force both sides to compromise. New technologies are changing how companies respond to trade wars. Some businesses are using artificial intelligence to find alternative suppliers more quickly. Others are investing in automation to reduce their dependence on imported materials. These changes might have lasting effects even after the trade war ends. The younger generation in both countries seems more frustrated with the trade war than older generations. Young people grew up in a world of global trade and find it difficult to understand why neighboring countries are fighting over commerce. Many young entrepreneurs are creating businesses that don't depend on cross-border trade to avoid future disruptions. Climate change adds another layer of complexity to the trade relationship. Both countries need to work together to address environmental challenges, but the trade war makes cooperation more difficult. Some green energy projects that would have benefited both nations have been canceled or delayed. International observers are watching carefully to see how this trade war ends. The resolution could set a precedent for how other countries handle trade disputes in the future. If tariffs prove effective, other nations might use similar tactics. If they fail, it could strengthen international trade agreements. The story isn't over yet. Every day brings new developments in this ongoing economic drama. As we watch events unfold, we're witnessing a historic moment that will shape international trade relationships for years to come. What happens next will depend on the choices made by leaders, businesses, and citizens in both countries. The Great Trade War of 2025 has shown us how quickly economic relationships can change and how these changes affect real people's lives. One thing is certain, this story has taught us that in our interconnected world, no country is an island. When neighbors fight, everyone feels the effects. Whether this lesson leads to better cooperation or more conflict in the future remains to be seen.
And there you have it, everyone. Tom's incredible journey through one of the most significant trade stories of our time. What started as a political promise became a complex economic drama affecting millions of people on both sides of the border. This story shows us how government decisions can ripple through our daily lives in ways we might never expect. From the price of maple syrup to the cost of building a new home, tariffs touch almost everything we buy and use. But more importantly, Tom's story reminds us that behind every economic statistic are real people, families, workers, and business owners whose lives are changed by these political decisions. The trade war isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about Sarah's furniture store, Mark's maple syrup farm, and Jennifer's job at the car factory. As English learners, you've just experienced a complex topic explained in simple, clear language. You've learned about tariffs, trade wars, negotiations, and economic consequences. These are important concepts that help us understand how our modern world works. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new story. Have a wonderful day, take care, and see you next time.